This is a relay project.
The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Welcome to The Discourse.
We've got another jam-packed episode for you as the legislative session wraps. But first, we've got a question from another listener to kick things off. Former Premier and leader of the official opposition, Rachel Notley.
Hi there, guys. Congratulations on your new podcast. Not surprisingly, I'm sure. I'm really pleased to have a chance to ask you a question to talk about. And my question is related to the Canada Pension Plan. We've been all over the province. We've been hearing from people by email, by petition, online, and of course in person. And I got to tell you, it's somewhere between 80 and 98% of people who want the UCP to keep their hands off of their hard-earned pension. So why then is Danielle Smith continuing to barrel ahead with this particular plan when businesses don't want it, accountants don't want it, Albertans don't want it, and everybody thinks that it's going to undermine our economic growth? What's going on here? What's the real agenda?
Erica, she makes a great point and asks a really thoughtful question. Do you want to take the lead on this?
What? Sorry, Cheryl, I was just gasping there that you agree with Rachel Notley. I feel like we've been out of politics long enough and like been in the private sector. You can admit when it's a political soapbox and she might want to get off of it. But I would say what she's trying to do is, and you said this in our very first episode, you said that, opposition focuses during session or, at any given point on 2 to 3 issues. And this is what Rachel Notley is focusing on. Her numbers and who's in the room. I would probably bet a pretty penny that there's a lot of people that hold NDP memberships that come to conventions and that were probably at rallies for Rachel Notley during the election that are in those rooms. So, I understand why she's trying to run on this narrative, but I'm getting pretty sick of the political grandstanding that we're seeing. And I actually think what we're going to see by Albertans is that shift in, I appreciate someone, hearing me out that I don't want the pension. But I think she's making it too political now and leaning too hard in that I think it's actually going to turn people off, like from politics. This is the sign where people, why people get sick of hearing from politicians. This is a prime example.
I totally disagree. Although I think what you just said could be applied to many issues. And I think certainly there is a point where people sort of reach their saturation and they get sick of hearing about an issue, especially if it's an issue with super hot rhetoric. I don't think this is one of those issues. I think if you look at what the NDP has done, which is consultations across Alberta, which they continue to do, they've tried really hard to make those sessions nonpartisan. And I think they've done a pretty good job. Other than, as you've said before, there's a few hot pieces of rhetoric. I mean, they're going in saying, we have an agenda to stop the government from moving Alberta out of CPP. But those sessions have been flooded with people who do not hold NDP memberships. They've been attended by people who are conservative supporters who come to talk on behalf of leaving CPP and starting an Alberta pension plan. And I think on top of the fact that this is just, I think damaging to the UCP's credibility, this is a huge, huge data grab for the NDP, who have hundreds of people showing up at sessions across this province who have never engaged with the party or the caucus before. And so for the caucus to be able to pick up that data on every session across this province, it's not only adding to the political narrative, but it's a big win for them in terms of organization.
So interesting because our listeners aren't always as engaged as we are. Data in the world of politics is it's like political gold. You don't go anywhere unless you're going to pick up data, get contact information, be able to reach out. So for sure, I'll give bonus points for using outreach on a quote unquote nonpartisan event for political gain. Like strategically, that's very smart. And I wouldn't doubt that that's what they would be doing. So Rachel asked a question that said, what's the hidden agenda? I think you just answered what the NDP's hidden agenda is to go across Alberta and get a bunch of data for what I believe heavily left-leaning individuals, but, you know, even grasping some maybe progressives or people that are far right but don't agree with the pension. You know, they're getting a big data grab, like you said. So that's their hidden agenda.
Okay, but it can't be both. It can't be these are all NDP supporters.
Okay, they're doing it. They're doing a political
data
grab. Okay, they're doing a data grab. We'll leave partisanship or ideology out of it. They're using these town halls as political capital and gaining data.
That is what the opposition does, right? You find an issue, you find something the government has moved forward on, and you tap into how the public is feeling, especially if they're opposed to it, and you organize them and you stand up for them and you echo their feelings. And if in the process you get their phone number, that's an added bonus for the caucus. But I think what you're seeing across the province is that people haven't had an outlet. They haven't had a real consultation. They haven't been able to look someone in the eye and say, I'm worried about what it would mean for my pension if we pulled out of CPP. And I mean, we've talked about this before. The NDP is doing this because the UCP has left a massive gap in this, and they've seized on the opportunity.
And I will give you that credit that I've said it before. The UCP should do full consultations. I would, I've seen them not put politicians in front of the podium. The NDP have. If they're going to go forward as the government, absolutely, like have the panel do it. Have Jim Dinning there and other experts to speak to it. By all means, I don't discourage the government from doing more. I would actually say, like, I've stayed pretty not like neutral on this because, again, that's actually how I feel. The government should have done more. The NDP did capitalize on a communication gap, and they're running with it. I just think they're almost pushing too far right now, that it's becoming like distasteful, and it's actually empowering me to look more towards what are the benefits, because I just think it's doing a disservice to people looking at the pension fully and measuring it on facts and figures, not rhetoric and grandstanding.
Okay, wait. You think the NDP is doing a disservice to Albertans by holding full consultations and continuing to talk about this?
By politicizing the F out of it.
I think the government is doing a disservice to Albertans by not having a fulsome consultation that leaves open the opportunity for people to say, I don't want to leave CPP. And I think if we just I know you don't want to, but let's just take Rachel at her word for a second and believe that when they have hundreds of people turn out at their events, 80 to 98% of people are opposed to leaving CPP. Let's just pretend that is, that we're going to trust that data. If that's true, because even in public polling, we've seen that this isn't a slam dunk. Like, this isn't an obvious play for the UCP. It's not like a majority of people have been begging the government to put forward this proposal. So what is the political win for the UCP here? Like, is this an affordability play? We'll make your paychecks a little bit bigger because we promise your contributions are going to be lower? Or is this part of a slower march towards a conversation about sovereignty? Like, what's the political gain for the UCP from doing something that, to be generous, is not popular?
I think that their strategy has shifted. I think that they've seen, that it hasn't maybe landed as is. They committed to releasing it. They committed to looking at it. And I don't think that they were intending to get the type of maybe pushback or criticism that they've received. So when she talks about a hidden agenda, I'm actually like, where is the UCP right now? They're not really talking about it. They've said that they're going to take this time to let the chair, Jim Dinning, come back with recommendations. I've said I hope that it goes to consultation, and true consultation with no politicians there driving what they believe is in the best interest of Albertans, and going through that process again. Like, if you look at the timeline, this process doesn't end till the spring. But I think they came out hard. As we saw, trying to explain to Albertans. I said they've missed the mark on really diving beneath the surface on what this means for Albertans. So I think we've seen a shift actually in their strategy. I don't think it's to drive people towards something now. I think that they're sitting back, digesting it. Like you said, the NDP have opportunized on that space that the UCP didn't fill from a communications. But as government, I actually appreciate that they're sitting back, assessing, and they may come forward with, we're not moving ahead with it. We're moving ahead with it. We're going to go to this consultation. For me, I think that the politics that we're seeing right now around the pension is, again, a disservice to Albertans because it doesn't lead with facts and figures. It drives emotions. And good on the NDP to jump in and take the airwaves on this. Strategically, that's a smart move for them. But the government, I don't think, should react to that. I think the government should sit there and be the government, because Rachel Notley's acting like the leader of the opposition, not someone that wants to be the premier. And the premier and the government need to act like the government.
She's the one holding the consultations. She's the one holding the consultations on a massive piece. This isn't inconsequential. This is people's retirement security. This is what they've worked their whole lives for. It's not inconsequential. And where the government has not done the right thing in terms of leading with facts and figures, in terms of making sure people have a fulsome understanding of what the implications of this could be, Rachel is acting like the premier, I would argue.
But
she's stepped up
falsifying,
and said,
like
I
you
will
said,
listen to you.
Government shouldn't be involved in consultations if you're the government. And Rachel is front and center at these consultations, acting like the opposition leader. I think she is over-politicizing. I think she's overplaying her hand on this. I think she found a good strategy in a good lane, and now she's leaning too hard into it, that I think if she's scaled back, she'd actually get a win off of this, and
like
show
what
that...
win?
That if she wants her message to get to the government, she's over politicizing it, and it's starting to fall, even for me, on deaf ears. I'm like, ugh, another thing about a faux consultation. To me, these are not real consultations, and they're not ones that are going to get the government's attention in the same way, because it's the NDP screaming and shouting as opposed to Albertans allowing them to have their voice and to be heard.
Well, and I would argue that like you have just said, the government has changed course in terms of how they're approaching dealing with CPP. And I believe that that is in large part because the NDP has raised this issue, because it has raised the lack of consultations, and because it has allowed Albertans to speak out about their concerns about this proposal. And their job isn't to send a message to the government. Their job is to send a message to Albertans and build their credibility over the course of an election cycle. And by stepping in where the government has failed, that's exactly what they're doing. And they're holding the government accountable. Like, if the work that they're doing has pushed the government to rethink its approach to CPP, they've done their job.
And I don't think the government would be listening to the grandstanding of the NDP. I think they'd be focused, and as they should be, on the Albertans, right? So there's other ways for Albertans to do this than Rachel Notley rallies that we're seeing at these consultations. I think that you and I are going to say, you'll say it's a consultation, I'll say it's a faux consultation. I'll own it's good. They're doing their job as opposition. Where I haven't seen them doing a good job of opposition is actually in a clip that we have coming up. Do you want to intro it, Cheryl?
Sure. This was an example, and I think it's one of probably a string of examples where the NDP have dragged up a clip of Danielle Smith, Premier Danielle Smith, flip-flopping. So this is a clip from, I believe, 2014, where Danielle Smith is speaking passionately, this time in opposition, in favor of CPP.
PC government has once again resorted to bullying our public sector unions rather than negotiating in good faith. Instead of getting a deal on pension reforms through tough but fair negotiations with union leaders, the PCs are again bringing down the legislative hammer, potentially smashing apart pension arrangements that thousands of Alberta frontline workers have built their future plans on. They're now going for broke with these premature and unnecessary changes to pension plans that will impact 200,000 workers.
We get to show listeners behind the curtains of what not to do as a political research working in opposition. And so I was actually in the Premier's office at this time, throne speech. It was the end of Premier Redford's tenure. This is Bill 9. Where they've gone wrong is this isn't CPP. The whole bill is about LAPP. It's about union negotiations. It's about local authorities' pension plans. And that's very, very different than the CPP. We've talked about how I think that the government and the NDP are not explaining the difference to some people that don't know CPP versus your union through your employer, which this one is looking at, is reforming some of those requirements through collective bargaining. And so this is completely irrelevant to her position on CPP, which since 2019, she actually, in the Fair Deal panel, was exploring this. She's supported it. This is a totally different jurisdictional situation. It's a totally different process. This is not about, the potential funds that could come back into the pockets. They're already there, and it's for individuals that work and fall under the LAPP. So the fact that opposition researchers dug this up and they think that that's how you can say that a decade ago, Premier Smith believed in the CPP is farce. It's actually like comical. I'm embarrassed for them. I'm like, man, I got some good researchers that I've worked with over the years. Maybe we can share some best practices on what to do.
Okay, let's keep it kind.
Hey,
I would say
they gotta know. They gotta know. This is not right.
When you're explaining, you're losing. And I think what this clip shows is that at a certain point, Danielle Smith was very concerned about the stability of people's retirement security. And that is a big change from what she's proposing now and the position she's proposing now. And so you're right. Maybe it's not an exact comparison, but I think it adds to what is already an argument that Albertans feel is not credible and is not based in logic. And so the opposition's job is to pile onto that. And I think they've done that with this clip, whether it's fair or not.
Point taken on if you have to explain you're losing. This is not the same thing. And again, I think when we have a lack of trust in politicians, regardless of if you're government and opposition, the NDP, to me, has run false narratives quite a bit. We saw it, the fear-mongering, the grandstanding. But never the
UCP, right? The UCP
I didn't say that. We're talking about you guys
there.
lying about the CPP versus the LAPP. I said about the pension, I wish there was actually a what is the CPP 101? What is the difference between what you would get from the CPP, who actually pays into it, because that is very different than the LAPP. So I get the attempt at this. It's just bad research. It's just bad opposition positioning because it discredits the message you're trying to convey. And again, it's a decade old. If this was her, in October, or her from her radio show or something along those lines, she's been talking about, getting Alberta more money back in Alberta. And I think it just misses the mark. On what the NDP was trying to achieve. I'm not talking about a radio show.
but let's talk about false narratives then. Okay, you don't like that the NDP dragged up a clip and painted it as a position broadly on CPP when that's what it was not. Fair criticism. But when we're talking about false narratives, the idea that the Alberta government put out numbers to people about what kind of returns we could expect from APP and what kind of pull Alberta would get from CPP should we choose to leave, that have been, again, to be generous, argued with, to be not generous, kind of debunked in terms of what those numbers mean and what the returns would be. To me, that's a false narrative. To tell people that if we leave CPP and we have our own APP, we're going to have lower contributions and higher returns, that's a false narrative. So
it's not from a report. And again, if the federal government came out and said, this is the actual number that would be transferred to you, and this is what you would be entitled to, and they totally shut down the 350 billion. Fair. I think that the UCP would have to humbly walk back what they said, and they would have to do a lot to regain the trust of Albertans on that. Again, I think that this is one of the things, and ideology aside, that I think that the NDP do is, again, this is, to me, really unfair and fear-mongering. You're scaring more people about this, and you're scaring seniors about their CPP with stuff like this. It's just bad politics. And I'm sorry. I would say that if the UCP caucus put out stuff like this and be like, ugh, fact check, please. And you can pivot it and just be like, this is LAPP. This is nothing. This isn't even about the pension. And I get what they're trying to do. I just think that they need to do due diligence before pushing clips out like this. And again, it's a very angry, scary sad, desperate approach to what I think they could actually get across far better and properly.
Agree to disagree. I think they're doing a great job.
Shocking.
And they have really focused on this and made incredible progress on it through the session. We cover a lot of politics in this show, and if you're feeling like you'd like to get deeper into the nitty-gritty of what we've been discussing, our sponsor, Pocket Lobbyist, is an incredible resource that helps you dive into the policy, the background, and the implications of government decisions. You can find out more in a free session that they're hosting on December 14th at noon Mountain Time. It's a 30-minute webinar outlining political and business risk for 2024. You can find out more and become a member by visiting pocketlobbyist.com. And we have a special discount for listeners of The Discourse that will get you 2 months free if you sign up before December 31st. That's a savings of $300. Just sign in and use the code DXP monthly.
All right. Well, I love saying this. Danielle Smith stuck it to the feds again this week, hammering back on what she says is a federal government's unconstitutional overreach on reducing methane emissions. The federal government announced a target of at least 75% reductions from the 2012 goals by 2030. Now, this is also, frustrating to the government of Alberta because last week they came out announcing that they had actually reached their targets 3 years ahead of time and at 45% reduction. So the premier is actually at COP, as we talked about last week, COP 28 in Dubai. But the Minister of Energy, Brian Jean, reiterated her message in a video on X that we're going to play right now to bring you all up to speed.
Our premier is exactly right in her statement on Guilbeault's unconstitutional proposed methane emissions regulations. The feds don't know this file at all, and grandstanding at COP doesn't do anything to help global emissions. Attacking Alberta industries won't reduce emissions in the countries that are releasing the most CO2 and the most methane. Tacking on $15 billion in costs to Canada's energy industry will not have any measurable impact on global emissions. Indeed, the federal government's own regulatory impact statement admits that Canada's energy industry makes up less than half of Canada's methane emissions.
I think this is an overswing. I hate the Sovereignty Act. I hate that Danielle Smith has made fighting the feds her entire political brand. But when she fought back on the clean energy regs, there was like a granule of logic. And I think she's undermined that by again threatening to invoke the Sovereignty Act for a target that Alberta will likely reach. And oil and gas, worldwide has said is achievable. In this case, I don't think that her rhetoric or the invocation of the Sovereignty Act is necessary. And I also find it just duplicitous to talk about how incredible Alberta has been in reaching its 2030 targets ahead of schedule, and then saying that there's no way that we can do this. So if this is possible, if Alberta could do this, I don't understand why we need to use this as another opportunity to, your word, political grandstand.
Yeah, so I believe 2025, so I don't know if it's 2 or 3 years. I've seen both, but just on timing. But
I think you're right, 2025.
Yeah, so we're looking at another 5 years to go from 45 to 75 when, methane equals emissions from oil and gas. So again, I think this is a move of the federal government to go hard against the oil and gas industry. And again, I've said, I'd love if the government never had to use the Sovereignty Act, but I think in the CER, in the clean energy regs, this is that was a smart move because it showed the symbolism of get in your lane. What I've seen though from watching the Dubai COP 28 is the federal government isn't really making friends. They're not really being taken seriously. And so I don't understand why you would take this Alberta Ottawa disagreement overseas and why you would announce it there. The announcement of the methane reduction when you haven't gone into rooms with Japan and China and India and had the conversations, that you're going to work together on that. Why would Guilbeault make this an international announcement when they're a very small player in doing this. I don't understand the strategy, and I know you're not part of the Liberal team, but like it seems like they're now trying to fight back on the provincial government, and they're actually elevating this to an international stage, which I think that this is the government of Alberta responding to that. And do I think they could tone it down a little? Probably. But I also think that this is one where we've seen the federal government come back and go double down on, screw you, Alberta. And so I don't know how you don't take what Guilbeault did as an Albertan. I think it's distasteful.
That feels a little vain on the part of Alberta for me. Like, this is a conference meant for countries to come to the table and talk about how we get to our shared climate goals together. And that is what the federal government has done, is go to the conference with announcements to make about how it sees Canada reaching those goals. This methane reduction should not have been a controversial issue. This is an issue. This is a target that Alberta has been has demonstrated incredible progress on, that industry has demonstrated incredible progress on, and likely we will continue to make incredible progress on. We should be what the world is watching, and instead, faced with the fact that Danielle Smith doesn't like that the federal government said it first, she's undermining all the progress that Alberta has made. And on a world stage, and I think if anyone's taking the fight to the world stage, it's Danielle Smith.
So you said that this is when international leaders are supposed to come to the table. If Guilbeault would have come out with a MOU, a memorandum of understanding, with anyone saying that they're going to work together to achieve these types of targets in tangent, take the win and frickin' run with it. This is him talking about it. Again, timing sucks because it does look like a direct attack on Alberta's announcement last week. You take the success or the oxygen out of this when you say you disregard Alberta reaching this. So 2012 to 2025, say 12, 13 years to get to 45%. We're doing great, but it's almost like, you know what? That's not good enough. And so we now expect you to get to 75, which ultimately will have an impact on the oil and gas industry. We're doing great, but that's a huge number to get from the 45 to 70 or 75. So I think that it's like trying to set Alberta up for failure and not giving us credit where credit's deserved. And so coming back to like what I think Guilbeault, how he could have politically won this, again, methane shouldn't be the fight that we have overseas. But again, he didn't come with any type of strategic negotiations, partnerships, education of, a bunch of countries. Like there's opportunity. A huge announcement would have been having an MOU with one of those three countries to actually show that they're working internationally and not just using COP as an announcement that, kind of jabs one of your jurisdictions. But
ditto for Alberta. Like, first of all, this has largely been said by oil and gas, by economists, by other experts. This has largely been characterized as achievable. And if that is the case, but Alberta just wants to say, don't impede on our jurisdiction, rather than stamp your feet and threaten to invoke the Sovereignty Act again, develop an equivalency. Like, let's make a Made in Alberta plan. That is how we got to exceeding our targets for 2025. The Alberta NDP created a plan for methane emissions reduction, and the UCP is doing a victory lap on having achieved it. The UCP can implement its own plan. We don't have to follow the federal government. If we truly believe that we can do it better, and we truly believe that our industry is not being adequately considered, then let's put forward our own plan. And let's, sign an agreement with the federal government saying that Alberta can do it better. But just saying I oppose it for the sake of opposing it and I threaten again to invoke the Sovereignty Act, that just impedes any progress that any of us are making.
I love this agreement you want to have with the feds. It's like very sunshines and rainbows. But, the
it's
NDP...
not sunshines and rainbows, though. Like, this has happened before. Saskatchewan currently has an equivalency agreement. Like, these are real. You don't like what the federal government is doing. You don't want them in your jurisdiction. Good. Replace it with something local.
I mean, Saskatchewan also does have Sask First, which is equivalent to the Sovereignty Act. They fortunately don't have to use it. But put yourself in the government shoes, because if you're feeling beat up, you're feeling like this person is working against you, all of these things, doesn't this add salt to the wound? Like, I know it's one issue. I think that this is, again, the built up frustration. And do we see maybe more emotion and frustration coming from the government because of that? But like, they've been beat up, or feel like they've been beat up for years, and many Albertans feel that as well. So I think that looking at this in silo, doesn't explain why we've got to this like battle back and forth between Alberta and Ottawa. I would love if they could come to an agreement. I think that there could have been, the government could have led with, we are leaders and this is what we've done, and we're going to continue to exceed our targets. However, what the federal government has done is not in consultation with us, there wasn't any talks, there wasn't any heads up. And usually that does happen with feds and other jurisdictions or places. So I think that it's important to see that this is also as a result of a lot of animosity back and forth. And so it's not just one issue. This is, again, the feeling of being beat up by Ottawa and not quote unquote getting our fair deal. And this was just another jab. So I think it like you said, we're seeing more emotion and frustration than maybe needed, but this is a long time coming, and it was just one on an international stage that deflated the great work and didn't give credit to Alberta for what we have achieved. He didn't even mention it.
Okay, and I think Alberta does deserve incredible applause and recognition for everything that it has achieved, because I do think that our sector is doing incredible things to reduce emissions and develop technologies for decarbonization. But for me, I don't care if the Alberta government is frustrated. I don't care if they're feeling emotional. I want them to do what's in the best interest of me as an Albertan in every decision that they make. And I would like to see them prioritize progress on the things that matter to Albertans above the performative acts that get them on the front page. And, we can make arguments about the CER, but in this case, they put political gain ahead of progress for Alberta.
I think we agree that we would want the government to always do what's in the best interest of Albertans. I think where we maybe disagree is on the approach of it. Again, I am all facts and figures, remove emotions. I think we are seeing some extra frustration from the government. So there could be some refinement in the deliverance of some of these messages. But I think what they're doing is what they believe is in the best interest of Albertans. And I think we got to leave it there, where we actually kind of agree on the outcome. It's just how we expect our government to get there. Well, we're speaking of international things. Do you know who is internationally recognized as the best place to get your closets? You guessed it. Our sponsor, California Closets. But they aren't just closet experts. Some of my favorite things about California Closets is their small details, like their lighting and finish solutions. Their finish palette will make your home feel a little more you. With warm and cool colors and textural wood grains to choose from, you can design the perfect space based on your needs and styles. They will also help you transform your space from ordinary to extraordinary with well-designed integrated lighting. This would be a giant step up for me from using my iPhone light to go through my closet and drawers in the dark as I try to avoid waking up my husband, which I can attest has a very low success rate. I highly encourage you to check out California Closets solutions for your home. Visit californiaclosets.ca today.
Well, before we wrap up today, let's do a quick look at the session as the House has risen and look back at what the parties accomplished and whether we think they accomplished what they set out to do when the throne speech began the session earlier this year. So, Erica, what did the UCP accomplish?
Well, they passed all of their bills. I think the most exciting thing was shocking to no one because they have a majority government and one opposition party. I would say you and I both lived through some pretty action-packed and some pretty boring legislative sessions. This probably falls closer on this snorbore of items coming through. I think the most exciting was like last night's lighting of the lights at the legislature. That was electrifying. But they passed all their bills. They moved it through. Where I actually think, and a lot of them were campaign promises and some housekeeping items, where I actually think, given all the other things that were going on, where the government actually didn't, talk about or advertise or praise themselves for was actually Bill 1. This was one that was a campaign commitment. Bill 1 is the Alberta Taxpayer Protection Amendment Act. And this is where they have said that it will go to a referendum before increasing taxes. That's pretty big. It's pretty bold. It sounds, again, maybe not as exciting, but this is a commitment by the government to not increase taxes unless Albertans give them the go ahead. Now, the reason I think this is interesting is actually because this is now going to have to be repealed by any other government, or maybe this government if we're in a fiscal situation that is dire and requires increase. Referendums are not cheap and they take a lot of planning. So you can't really make fast decisions on this. I think it's going to put, should the NDP ever be in government in the future, in a pretty sticky spot to have to repeal, tax increases, where it wasn't very hard for us to repeal the carbon tax. We ran on it.
Well, I like the way you think. I look forward to the NDP being back in government as well.
It's a long time from now.
And okay, so I understand the politics associated with the bill. I think it's just dumb in a province that relies so heavily on resource revenue, where a province that has been through ups and downs in what that revenue looks like, and a province that has refused up until this point to consider a provincial sales tax. To say we are going to control our tax measures through a referendum in those cases, that seems illogical to me, but I understand the politics. In terms of what was accomplished this session, obviously the NDP's job as opposition is to oppose. It's to try to raise a subject, to try to poke holes in the government's credibility. And I think, as we've talked about on CPP, they've done that. They have raised this issue. They have held town halls across the province. They continue to until the end of the year. And they have really demonstrated that the government is not up to the task of fully consulting with Albertans. They also continued to raise healthcare, which is still one of the number one issues that Albertans care about, and the threat that the UCP might privatize at least portions of the healthcare system. So I think if the opposition's goal is to just raise a couple of key issues that they're more trusted on throughout the entire session, the NDP has done a pretty good job on this. What I have found strange about this session, in addition to Bill 1, is that typically when you have a new government come in, their first year and their first session is basically a push to implement the mandate that they've got from the people in terms of what their platform looked like in the election. And I don't think we saw super traditional platforms in this election, but there was a string of really key commitments. And in terms of this first session, Danielle Smith has gone way off book. She intentionally did not run on CPP. And we're seeing her spend, a lot of airtime and bandwidth talking about it. We saw her promise a tax cut in the election campaign. We saw her promise things like discounts to seniors. That's the kind of stuff I would have expected to see in this session, a plan to move forward with how to implement these things. But when the government is pushed on where is this stuff, they don't have an answer.
And I would actually agree that this session is different. Usually your first session after an election win, guns ablazing, you're coming in and putting all of those campaign commitments. There is sprinkling of them. I mean, you've got the Public Health Amendment Act. We have seen a reform of AHS during this fall session, or this period of time since the election. We've seen obviously addressing of the Pension Protection Act, which I'm sure we could argue about the intention of bringing a bill forward that says you won't do something as opposed to you will. This is why I'm actually surprised about Bill 1, because it was one of those key campaign things about keeping your taxes low, protecting the money in your pocket. And I think if they would have actually run on that narrative, they could have taken a lot of maybe wind out of the sails of the NDP as opposition. So I do think the NDP they sunk their teeth into the issues that they wanted to run with. I'm surprised that there wasn't maybe a few more big nuggets, but what we saw is, and what we know is, like, the legislative session is sometimes setting you up for future announcements and strategic moves where we've still seen a lot of the reform to health happen. We've seen a lot of decisions being made around, setting them up with announcements in education, announcements in post-secondary, announcements in mental health and addictions. We've seen some of these things come forward, and then seniors care and shelters we've seen a lot of. So a lot of that stuff can actually happen out of legislative session. Again, I don't think right now they're turning the dial to talk about those things that they're doing behind the scenes as opposed to in the House. So maybe that's what we'll see between now and the next legislative session. Now, I have to ask you, because everyone is wondering, is this Rachel Notley's last legislative session? There's been talks about who's going to step up. There's been articles about speculations about who. Rachel's done a very, very good job of being the leader and being the brand. So I think regardless of whoever steps into those shoes, it's going to be a challenge. But there's also been discussions about stepping away from the federal NDP. So is that all part of the puzzle of, like, not making Rachel front and center as the NDP? And, you got any hot goss for us about what you know or don't know? Or can we speculate this is her last legislative session?
Well, I think there's always speculation, especially in the wake of an election loss. But Rachel hasn't made a decision yet. And I don't think there is an imminent plan for her to announce a decision on her future. So I don't know if this is her last session. And I think a lot of that gossip around what the future of the party looks like and what the brand looks like is to be expected when you take a hard look at what went right and what went wrong in an election loss. So no. In short, I have very little gossip for you, but I look forward to seeing Rachel lead the party through the new year and into 2024.
So just a quick question before we close to follow up on that is, I look at it as, like, from a political operations standpoint, you do need to, should we expect, or what I'm expecting to see, and maybe you can agree or disagree, is a shift over the next year or whatever it's going to be for Rachel's political runway, of seeing more people come front and center, seeing Rachel try to boost the party brand, position them, because again, like, she is very instrumental, and it will be difficult for her to not be associated with the NDP. So for the success of the NDP, I feel like we're going to need to start seeing a transition, and it's not going to be as abrupt as maybe we've seen with other leaders stepping down, because she's very much the brand, but that's also going to be a challenge as the NDP find a new leader.
And I think you could expect, no matter what Rachel decides to do in her political career, that she will always and long be associated with the NDP. But I think it's natural. Rachel has sort of launched this conversation by saying that she will, eventually make a decision about her future and announce it to the public. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that there's conversations about what those next steps could look like, or what the next leader of the NDP, no matter when it happens, could be. Yeah, I think these are all natural discussions, and I think the stuff that happens behind the scenes is all natural as well. And I think we'll just wait to see when Rachel's ready to talk about what her future looks like.
That is our show. This is the last episode of our pilot series, so we're going to take a little break over the holidays, but you can catch up on old episodes and connect with us on Instagram and X, and we'll see you in 2024.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram @TheDiscoursePod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.